Hello everyone, my name is SM Fahad. Today I will be presenting a presentation. The name of the presentation is Understanding and Applying the Earliest Learning Framework version 2.0. In this presentation, I'll be arguing that it's far more than a planning document. I want to show how its vision, pedagogy, principles, practices, learning outcomes, and planning circle work together to shape who an early childhood teacher actually become, such as our identity, our ethics, and the everyday decisions we make. The overview of this presentation. I'll move through four connected ideas. First, the vision and the pedagogical approaches that bring it to life. Second, a critical reflection on the principles, practices, and outcomes. Third, the planning circle in action. And finally, the framework underwrites our professional identity and ethical practices. My thread throughout is this: the EYLF doesn't just describe children, it describes the educator as well. The vision. So let's start with the vision: belonging, being, and becoming. These three words are deceptively simple. Belonging is about relationships and connection, the roots of a child's identity. Being honors the here and now, valuing childhood as a time worth living fully, not just preparing for school. And becoming recognizes how rapidly children's identities and capacities change in these early years. But here's what I find most significant is that the pedagogy that enacts this vision repositions the teacher. If I genuinely believe a child belongs, is becoming, then I cannot be a transmitter of facts. I have to be a co-constructor of learning, a researcher of children's thinking, and an advocate for childhood that replaces my professional identity firmly with a constructivist and cultural historical orientation where the child is capable and agentic. The vision, in other words, make a claim about me as well. Theoretical perspectives. Our pedagogy is driven by deeper theoretical perspectives. The developmental view, drawing on Piaget and Erikson, sees growth as predetermined stages. The behaviorist view from Skinner emphasizes teacher-directed, reward-based learning. The cultural historical view, Vygotsky and Brojov, sees learning as collaborative and shaped by family and community. And the post-structural and post-humanist perspectives, thinkers like Foucault, Fiera Mellon, sees children's rights and ecological care. So what's interesting is that the EOLF doesn't just pick one, but it clearly lenses towards the cultural, historical, and rights-based end. That tells me the framework has taken a deliberate philosophical position. And as a professional, I need to be able to recognize and articulate it. Curriculum approaches. The philosophy plays out through curriculum approaches, which I find most useful to think of as continuum rather than fixed boxes. Across a single day, I'll move along each one, from adult-centered toward child-led, from transmission toward constructivist, from predetermined toward emergent, from segregated toward integrated, from an individual developmental focus toward a community of learners. The critical point is that these approaches aren't mutually exclusive. The pattern of where I see it reveals my actual philosophy, not the one I claim, but the one I live. So, the EOLF nudges the pattern towards the child-led, emergent, integrated end. So, when I'm planning, I'm constantly asking myself, am I drifting toward control out of convenience, or am I genuinely following the child-led? Now to the principles. We have 8 principles. 1. Secure respectful and reciprocal relationships. 2. Partnerships with families. 3. Respect for diversity. 4. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives. 5. Equity, inclusion, and high expectations. 6. Sustainability. 7. Critical reflection and ongoing professional learning. 8. collaborative leadership, and teamwork. Now I'm going to move into practices. So we have practices, in other words, what we do in a child care. So number one, holistic, integrated, and interconnected approaches. Two, responsiveness to children. Three, play-based learning and intentionality. Four, learning environment. Five, cultural responsiveness. Six, continuity of learning and transitions. Seven, assessment and evaluation of learning. Now we have five learning outcomes. The five one, a strong sense of identity. Two, connected with and contributing to their world. Three, a strong sense of well-being. Four, confident and involved learners. Five, effective communicator. It would be easy to just list this and move on, but I don't think listening is enough for this assignment or for genuine practice, so I want to reflect on them critically. Critical reflection on principles. The principles are not neutral. They take an ethical and political stance, taking equity paired with high expectations. By linking those two, the framework actively rejects deficit thinking. It refuses to let me lower the bar for a child because of their background. Instead, it obligates me to see every child as capable. That's a powerful equity statement, distinguished a bullet point. Then, considering that version 2.0 elevated Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives and sustainability into separate principles, that's not cosmetic. It signals a social reconstructionist and post-humanist agenda, a belief that education should help transform society and our relationship with the environment, not just reproduce it. And naming critical reflection itself as a principle is striking because it makes question about my own practice an ethical duty rather than an optional extra. Critical reflection on practices and outcomes. The practices and outcomes deserve the same scrutiny. Holistic, integrated practices resist the temptation to break a child into separate skills. And the five broad outcomes do the same work. They make whole child development visible instead of reducing learning to a checklist. Positioning play-based learning and responsiveness are core practices affirms that constructivist stance. Children build meaning actively, and my intentionality should amplify their agency, not replace it. And cultural responsiveness and community of learning mean inclusion is planned for structural, not left to chance. So when I put this together, I can see how framework deliberately constructs environment that are exclusive, respectful, holistic. It's by design, not by an accident. The planning circle. All of this becomes real through the planning circle. I think of it as a continuous circle of inquiry, not a linear tasks. I observe gathering evidence about a child's strengths, interests, and culture. I assess by interpreting that evidence against the outcomes alongside families and theory. I plan intentional relational experiences. I implement them responsively, and and I evaluate by reflecting critically on what worked and why. Crucially, reflections runs through the whole circle, and it's most powerful when we do it together as a team. The planning circle in action. Let me make that concrete with a real life example. I observed a toddler on a natural walk, completely absorbed, gathering leaves, sorting rocks by size, naming the creatures he found. In my learning story, I captured his curiosity and persistence, assessing against outcome 2 and 4. I could see a child connecting with his world and showing the dispositions of confidence and involved learner. So I planned an emergent investigation with him, a nature table, magnifiers, sorting and counting provocations, and a story about caring for country. As I implemented it, I scaffolded within his zone of proximal development, posing open questions and modeling new vocabulary while following his lead. And in evaluating, I asked how I might extend his thinking next time, perhaps through Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives on caring for country. That single moment showed me the whole circle turning: professional identity and ethics. This brings me to why the framework matters professionally. The EOLF doesn't operate alone. It frames me as a reflective, intentional, lifelong learner, giving my role a shared language and purpose. Reading alongside the Early Childhood Australia Code of Ethics and the National Quality Standard and the Australian Professional Standards for Teacher, it guides me to act in children's best interests and uphold their rights. And, and it gives my decisions defensible, evidence-based foundations. When, when a family or colleague asks why I made a particular choice, I can directly point to the principle or outcomes and the planning circle. These documents work as an interlocking system. The ULF supplies the vision, and the standards and code translate it into accountable ethical practice. To conclude it, so drawing the course together, the vision of belonging, being, and becoming defines not just the child, but my identity as co constructor of learning. The principles, practices, and outcomes work together to build inclusive, respectful, and holistic environments grounded in social justice. The planning circle turns that philosophy into responsive everyday practice, and sitting within the NQS, the Code of Ethics, and the professional standards, the framework underwrites ethical, accountable decision making. Ultimately, I have come to see the EYLF as more than a document. It's a professional compass, one that holds children's rights, families' voices, and our own integrity as educators right at its own center. Thank you for listening. Bye.